deep in mud and sweat, the boy was a curious fixture along the lane that cut through Carter's east field, stooped over a patch of earth. He scooped clay and muck into a battered bucket, shaping holes that looked like nothing so much as shallow puddles. Not two, not three, but a scatter of them. Dozens stretching across the green, each one just big enough to swallow a boot and stubborn enough to fill again after the rain. Neighbors in pickup trucks slowed as they passed. Window glass rolled down to catch a better look, murmuring among themselves, "It's gone to his head who digs 100 holes in a field and calls it sense." None stopped to ask, not even his own uncle, who'd once told him there was nothing new left for land that old all day. The boy toiled alone, his reasons buried deeper than the ponds he built, waiting for water, waiting for proof. Patterson Ridge lay on the far side of the county, a patchwork of pastures and gardens bounded by weathered split-rail fences that had watched 3 generations come and go. The land, patient as any elder, remembered years of drought just as it remembered seasons of swollen creeks that swept away topsoil in a muddy rush. There were summers when corn leaves turned brittle before July, and autumns when the bottom fields stayed too wet to work, the earth sucking at boots like hungry mouths. This place was honest and predictable, a town where everyone's business rode the same breeze as the scent of sweet clover and silage. Saturday mornings drifted by to a chorus of mowers and gossip traded at the co-op, while Sundays brought rows of washed pickup trucks lining the church gravel lot. Most folks here valued what was tried and true, repeating the harvest routines passed down in family ledgers or by word novelty, when it crept in, was measured with a wary eye, sideways glances from the porch, cautious talk over coffee. They noticed every fresh fence post, every new patch cut into woodland, every child testing an idea in the open. Out here, progress wasn't made with grand gestures but in slow, careful increments. So when a streak of muddy water-filled holes began dotting an old hayfield, the spectacle wasn't lost on anyone. Change, especially the kind that looked like folly, drew its own circle of silent witnesses, waiting with skepticism or secret hope to see what settled in the end. Eli Morgan had never been a loud child, nor the sort to chase the center of any gathering born the middle son in a family of 5. He had inherited his mother's patience and his grandfather's knack for noticing what others let slip by Eli's father, Mark, worked the land from before sunrise, carrying the weight of tradition in every calloused handshake and silent prayer over seed. Each morning, Eli lingered on the porch steps, eyes tracing the lay of dew and the movement of birds along the hedgerow, collecting small details in the quiet. It was his grandfather, Amos, a wiry man with silver hair and a weathered face, who taught him to listen to more than words, to study the long shadows in dry weather, to taste the air before a storm, to read the stories water wrote in the soil's surface. Years ago, Eli watched Amos build a pond along the creek, not with machines or blueprints, but with patience and a shovel, letting the land guide his hands. That memory echoed in Eli every time drought cracked the pastures or rain ran unchecked through the furrows. Where others saw bad luck or hard soil, Eli saw patterns, saw possibilities. What set him apart wasn't stubbornness, but a quiet, persistent hope that the land could be healed in ways old and new if only someone was willing to try. For years, Carter's East Field had been both a blessing and a curse. When storms came through, rainwater raced downhill and pooled by the road, leaving the crest of the field bone dry within days. Come midsummer, you could follow the pattern in patches of yellowed grass and brittle stalks ruined before harvest. Neighbors had tried their share of solutions, disking deeper furrows, hauling tankers to irrigate during dry spells, even seeding the ground with the latest drought-resistant rye. None of it lasted. The rain would vanish by the third hot week, and all that remained was rutted ground. The earth hardened and cracked like an old man's hands. More than one old-timer labeled the land a lost cause, muttering that it won't ever hold water, no matter how many tricks you pull. The county agent walked the ground more than once, offering the usual advice: mulch heavier, rotate crops, pray for a better spring. Talk at the feed store circled back to the same conclusion. If a problem's worth fixing, someone else would have solved it by now. There was a tired resignation in every shrug, a collective reliance on habit over risk. The field remained exactly what it had always been, a lesson for young farmers about the limits of stubborn earth and the folly of trying to change it. Or so everyone believed, until a boy with muddy boots began digging holes where others saw only disappointment. Eli's method was simple at first: a circle scratched in the earth, a hole dug with a post-hole digger, and water carried in a battered tin pail. He chose the low patches first, places where puddles lingered after the rare spring downpour, and shaped shallow basins by hand, packing the sides tight as he'd once watched his grandfather do. The bigger ponds, the kind grown men built for cattle and catfish, were beyond his reach, but he reasoned there was power in small beginnings, observing creek banks and old wallows where rainwater stuck around long after everything else dried. Eli borrowed ideas from nature more than from any book over the first weeks. Most of his ponds failed, mud crumbled, water vanished into thirsty ground, and even good ones filled with silt after the first hard rain. The neighbors' laughter was kind, but sharp. Two boys from down the road rode circles around his work site and left, shaking their heads. More than once, Eli arrived in the morning to find footprints where curious neighbors had checked if his latest pond had held overnight unbothered. Eli adapted. He lined some holes with extra clay, reinforced others with stone scavenged from the pasture, and tested pond sites at varying depths and diameters, keeping careful notes in a dog-eared binder. Some nights he lay awake replaying what had gone wrong, resolved to try differently the next morning. It was slow work, stubborn work, the kind that made fingers ache and shoulders burn by sundown. Every evening he measured water loss, adjusting his methods. Sometimes a pond was simply too shallow or in the wrong spot. Other times a tweak to the rim or a handful of weeds acted as a smart filter. It wasn't about doing more, but doing better. Where mockery might have broken another child's resolve, for Eli, it only sharpened his focus. Each setback offered a lesson, and each lesson brought the whisper of progress, a tiny wet circle that lingered just a little longer in the fickle field, promising that transformation begins at the hands of those patient enough to listen to the land and brave enough to keep digging. When the spring rain finally came, it arrived with little warning, a steady, soaking shower that flattened the rye and filled the ditches overnight. For the first time, the field Eli had punctured with his small ponds did not shed the water as it always had. Instead, the rain pooled in every hollow he had crafted, little mirrors catching patches of sky where there once was only dust. 3 days later, while other fields shriveled to their old habits, surface cracked, new shoots limp, Carter's East Field held green grasses thickened around each pond. Wild flowers bloomed where before there were only weeds. Eli's father studied the change in silence. Neighbors tramped out after church to see for themselves, boots sinking into earth still damp long after the rain had moved on. Quiet resentment turned to curiosity, and on the far edge of the property, old Mr. Pendry, who'd called Eli a fool, was spotted with a shovel, carving his own shallow pool behind the shed. Without a word, the field had started teaching its own lesson. By early summer, a subtle transformation swept through Patterson Ridge. Neighbors who once passed judgment from their trucks now walked fence lines at dusk, glancing over at Carter's East Field. Word traveled quietly, first to a cousin, then to an old friend at the feed store, while makeshift ponds began appearing in other pastures and gardens. Yields rose where water used to vanish, patches of green stayed lush even in the dry spells, and birds once rare to the region gathered at new watering spots. Eli became the unlikely centerpiece of this quiet revolution. His notebooks, once a private ledger of trial and error, were borrowed over kitchen tables and studied by men who'd previously dismissed him outright. Farmers who had spent lifetimes defending tradition found themselves embracing a fresh idea, not because it came from an outsider, but because it grew from local hands, shaped by familiar struggle. What started as whispers of mockery dissolved into nods of respect, and the laughter that trailed Eli's muddy boots became invitations to supper and honest questions asked with humility. Even the county agent, impressed by the resilience of Carter's East Field, recommended small-scale ponds at the next co-op meeting. Old lessons were rewritten by new results, and the boys' patient, persistent tinkering had become the catalyst for a change nobody had dared imagine. In the countryside, wisdom often wears muddy boots and is slow to announce itself. Eli's rows of tiny ponds had begun as the work of a dreamer, dismissed because they challenged what everyone knew about hard ground and dry years. Yet the land listened, and nature, as ever, rewarded those who paid attention to its quiet teachings. Sometimes it is the ideas that seem foolish or naive, the ones born of long evenings watching water pool near a stone or remembering an old man's advice, that gradually reshape not only a field but the thinking of a whole community, as one neighbor muttered half in awe. Turns out, it's the crazy ones who see what the rest of us are missing. In truth, every field waits for such courage, for someone bold or humble enough to try what's never been done and to trust that, in time, the land will answer back. What about you? Have you ever been called crazy for trying something new on your land or in your life? Maybe friends or neighbors doubted your idea, only to see it work in the end. Share your story in the comments below, or tell us what lesson you carried from Eli's muddy, persistent hope. We'd love to know where you're watching from, whether your fields are dusty, frozen, city green, or halfway across the world. This channel is built on the wisdom and spirit of people like you, each with stories worth telling. If this tale of stubbornness, surprise, and second chances meant something to you, consider subscribing and joining our farm family. Every week we share stories inspired by real determination, simple joys, and the unexpected ways the land teaches us all. We read every message, every location you send in, and your voice makes this community something truly special.